There was a time when every time the monkey time played, the whole city of Chicago seemed to hold its breath. Diners turned up their radios, passersby paused on street corners, and every lonely heart suddenly found a place to belong. Major Lance's voice didn't just make people dance, it made an entire generation believe that music could save them. And yet, he died alone in a public hospital, penniless after being blatantly robbed by the music industry. The house where he spent his final years now stands abandoned, moss-covered, walls cracked, and hauntingly silent. Inside, they found a tape with faded audio, a letter with no recipient, and a void no one could fill. Had Major Lance known all along that he would be forgotten, had the world, once applauding him, never cared enough to hold on to him? And the most painful question remains unanswered. How did a voice that once made millions rise to their feet end up living and dying as if it never existed? If there was any place that preserved the last remnants of that voice, it would be the cold, deserted house in Atlanta, where Major Lance locked himself away for 2 decades with a dozen secrets. Deep inside a declining neighborhood in South Atlanta, the brick split-level house at 7420 Fairburn Road was bought by Major Lance for $43,000 in November 1974, shortly after he left Chicago quietly following a drug scandal. The house spanned over 2,000 square feet, with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small garage, and a basement that had been converted into a discreet recording studio where, for nearly 2 decades, not a single recording ever came out. He lived there alone. No wife, no children, not even a visit from old bandmates, just aging walls blocking out the light, layers of sheet music pasted and decaying over time, leaving behind purple ink stains like unhealed wounds. Later, investigators confirmed that some handwritten lyrics in the studio showed signs of being written in a delirious state, broken lines, offbeat rhythms, and repeated words like silence, darkness, and no one hears. Neighbors recalled seeing Major Lance only at the most unexpected hours. Once, around 3 a.m., he walked into the backyard in a 1960s performance suit, holding a wireless microphone and singing toward a broken fence. There was no one listening, no music playing, just his voice echoing and then vanishing as if it never had been. The chilling detail was the old tape found in the basement recorder. At first, people thought it was an early take of Monkey Time, but after a few minutes, the music stopped. His voice broke through the microphone, whispering one sentence, "Don't let anyone hear this. This is just for me." In the house once expected to revive his music, only unspoken last words remained, and the artist who once made an entire city dance now reduced to a lone shadow in rooms no one dares to enter again. Major Lance was born in 1939 in a poor Mississippi town, where blues music floated out of wooden houses, but couldn't drown out the noise of bootleg liquor and violence. His mother vanished one night when the police raided their home on suspicion of illegal alcohol. He was too young to understand what happened, only remembering the thunderous footsteps of the officers and his mother's old sandals left on the porch. His father didn't live much longer. During a fight at a local gambling den, he was fatally stabbed and died before the ambulance arrived. No one attended his funeral. No one came to adopt the boy. Major became an orphan at just 8 years old. An aunt on his mother's side agreed to take him to Chicago, but it was far from a home. She was a janitor at a public school, living in a cramped apartment barely fit for one adult. He slept on an old mattress next to the kitchen, where the smell of frying oil and the noise of the exhaust fan mixed into his dreams each night. No one asked what he wanted. No one taught him how to survive in the city. He had only one thing to hold on to: his voice, the only sound that reminded him he was still alive. At 15, he was expelled for singing Twist in the schoolyard during the flag-raising ceremony. As the national anthem played, he shrugged his shoulders, twisted his hips, and sang out so loud that the principal came running down from his office. His friends burst into laughter, but he just stood there, unrepentant, offering no explanation, as if this were the last time he'd ever get to sing for someone. On the day he was expelled, he didn't look back and never returned to school again. From then on, Major lived in the shadows around the Regal Theater, the venue where legendary artists performed, artists he never even dared to dream of meeting. He He slept behind the stage, ate leftovers, and sang to the stagehands in exchange for a cold sandwich. It was there, on a rainy night, that Curtis Mayfield found him quietly singing next to a pile of audio cables. Curtis didn't say much. He simply brought him into the studio and said one line that Major would remember for the rest of his life: "Don't sing to be famous, sing to stay alive." That was the first time he ever recorded in a real room, with a real microphone, and the first time he realized his voice might be the only thing keeping him from being swallowed whole, not by the world, but by the silence growing inside him. In 1963, when the Monkey Time hit number 2 on the Billboard R&B chart, all of Chicago went wild. Radio stations played the song non-stop all day. The line, "Come on, baby, it's Monkey Time," echoed through bars, street parties, and even black barbershops on the south side of the city. But beneath the applause and the camera flashes, Major Lance still felt out of place. He often said, "My name's on the poster, but the money never makes it to my pocket." For him, every performance was a payment on debt, every contract a gamble, and every compliment a luxury he couldn't afford to believe in. In the years that followed, he released more hits from to Hey Little Girl, but nearly all the profits went into the pockets of the men behind the desks, not the man holding the microphone. He once asked his record label for an advance to pay for his aunt's medicine and was denied. They told him to focus on his tour instead of worrying about family stuff. In 1967, during a forced international release deal, Major signed a contract he didn't understand. He had just finished 3 back-to-back nights of performing, was nearly exhausted, and the lawyer representing him had been hired by the label. That contract stripped him of all publishing rights to his original recordings, meaning no matter where the songs played or how many millions listened, he wouldn't earn a single cent. When he learned the truth, he screamed in the label's boardroom, slammed the table, shattered a glass, and shouted that he would sue. But just days later, his name quietly disappeared from the performer rosters at most of Chicago's major venues. There was no explanation, no official notice. Promoters just stayed silent, then shook their heads. After that, he began drinking every day, not to celebrate, but to sleep. Alcohol helped him forget the hollow applause, helped him avoid hearing his own songs on the radio without being paid a dime. His voice began to rasp, lost its breath, and by the late 70s, people said he couldn't even sing one phrase in rhythm anymore. One winter night in 1978, someone found him curled up behind the stage of a small church on the city's west side. He wore a wrinkled coat, rested his head on an old microphone, and mumbled the name of a woman no one recognized. No one asked. No one came closer. People assumed he was drunk, or mad, or both. And then they walked away. Major Lance, the man who once made thousands get up and dance, had become a shadow no one wanted to face. There were no official records of what he went through, no diagnosis of depression, no treatment, only the cold afternoons, where he sat outside his old house, staring into the distance and whispering, "They didn't take my voice, they just took away the reason for me to sing." The price of fame, for him, wasn't the fading of the spotlight, but the moment he realized he had never truly touched it. Fame could make people know his name, but it was never enough to secure him a dry place to sleep behind the church stage. It wasn't his career, nor his voice, but love itself that Major Lance lost first. Christine, his first and only wife, loved him when he was just a backup singer in a bar, unknown, broke, with nothing but a longing gaze and the promise, "I'll sing for you all my life." They married quietly in Chicago in 1961, no white dress, no band, just a simple wedding ring passed down from her mother and a dream not yet defined. But that dream didn't last long. After his early success in the 60s, Lance began spiraling into a loop of performances, contracts, disappointment, and drunkenness. Christine tried to hold the family together in every way possible, even selling her jewelry to cover medical bills when he began abusing painkillers for nerve pain following a minor car accident. Until one night, Lance secretly pawned his mother-in-law's wedding ring for a few vials of morphine. Christine said nothing. The next morning, she took their 2 children, left the keys and a hastily scribbled note, "I don't have the strength to save you from yourself." From then on, She vanished from his life like a track cut from the master reel, never returned, never looked back. Major Lance had 4 children, 3 daughters and 1 son, but throughout his life, he never really lived with any of them for more than a few summers, not because he didn't know how to be a father, but because his life was never stable enough to hold a home. After the marriage ended, his children were scattered, some with their mother, some with their grandmother, one sent to another state to live with distant relatives. He knew each of their names, remembered each birthday, even kept a small notebook tracking their height, weight, and favorite things in detail. But he never dared to show up. Not because he didn't love them, but because he didn't believe he deserved to walk into their lives. When asked in a 1981 interview why he hadn't tried to stay in touch, he simply smiled and said, "I can't call my children when I'm still sleeping behind a theater." It wasn't just a line, it was a painful confession. How can a man who can't hold on to himself hold on to his place in a child's heart? How can you teach your children to live when you're barely surviving on music and alcohol? There were times he dialed the number, then hung up, wrote letters, then tore them apart. Once, upon hearing that his daughter had won a dance scholarship, he quietly sent flowers to her school, no name, no note, except for 3 scrawled words on a small card, "Daddy's proud." But did she know? Could she feel it? Did she guess that the father she never dared to mention was still clinging to a final thread of connection? Major Lance wasn't rejected by his children. The more painful truth, he never gave them the chance to reject him. And that was the greatest loss of his life. Not the stage, not the money, not the record deals, but the silence between a father and the children who would never know how hard he tried to love them. In silence, in fear, and in all those Fridays that never got a call. All people know is that on his 60th birthday, he received a bouquet of yellow roses left at the door of his old house. No name on the card, just one sentence. "You're still alive and I still remember." The handwriting was later identified as Marla's, his second daughter, who studied dance and briefly worked as a backup dancer for soul singers in the early 90s. Yet she never appeared in public, never responded to the press, and never saw him again. In a notebook found inside the abandoned house, there were over 30 identical lines, all scribbled in water-blurred blue ink. "I will call my child on Friday." The first was written in 1986, the last in July 1993, just months before Major Lance collapsed from heart failure. On the yellowed page, he wrote the same sentence again and again, "I will call my child on Friday." 37 lines, crooked, misaligned, some shaky as if by a feverish hand. Others pressed so hard it seemed his finger bled, but for 7 years. Not a single call was made, no number saved, no messages sent. No child ever knew their father promised himself every week, then broke that promise. Not from forgetfulness, but from fear. Major didn't forget. He remembered every name, every birthday, every little story someone told him. And it was precisely because he remembered too well that he couldn't bring himself to call. Because if he did, he'd have to face the truth that his children had grown up without him, had learned to live without him, and maybe no longer needed to know who he was. He couldn't bear that possibility, so he chose to survive on hope, faint, fragile hope that as long as he hadn't called, there was still a chance. That's why. When he was admitted to the hospital for the last time on a gloomy summer afternoon in 1994, he didn't list any of his children on the medical forms. When the nurse asked, "Who should we call?" he stayed silent for a long time. Then finally gave one name, Benny Dorsey. Not a blood relative, not even family, just a guitarist who played beside him for nearly a decade. An old friend who sang backup in the wings of the Regal Theater, who once split a lunchbox with him after a failed show in Ohio, who saw him crouched on the steps backstage, clutching his head when he found out his daughter had graduated high school and he wasn't invited. Benny arrived nearly 7 hours later. He stood by the hospital bed, looked at Major, his frail friend gasping through an oxygen mask, and said nothing. No questions, no blame, no comfort, just a gaze. One long look that held half a lifetime of shared applause and forgetfulness. Then he signed the temporary discharge papers, adding one short note, "Not a relative." That was the last time Major Lance had someone by his hospital bed. After that came silence, and just like the calls that were never made, The people who should have been called were never mentioned again. When Major passed away a few weeks later, it was Benny who received the call from the morgue, and he declined, not out of spite, but because he didn't know where to bury his friend, with what, or if anyone would come to say goodbye. So Major Lance's body remained in cold storage for another 3 weeks, unclaimed, with nowhere to return. Eventually, the city of Atlanta arranged for his burial in a public cemetery designated for the homeless where there was no headstone, only a number etched into a metal plaque. The man who once made millions sing, dance, and cry died without a single soul calling his real name one last time. And the cruelest part wasn't the silence. It was that until his final breath. He still believed that on some Friday, he'd find the courage to call his daughter. Only, he never got the chance. On September 3, 1994, at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Major Lance took his final breath from heart failure and sepsis. After years of physical and emotional exhaustion, he died in a standard hospital room, with no family by his side, no music, no one to speak his name, no radio station covered it, no record label spoke up, and not a single colleague appeared to say farewell. His name vanished from the headlines just as the music industry had erased countless black artists once their moment passed quietly, without mourning. For the next 3 days, Major's body remained in the hospital morgue's cold chamber, a temporary tag taped to his ankle. No will, no bank account to check, no one to step forward. The only one who came was an aging member of the Soul Music Chicago Collective, a small group of retired artists helping each other when no one else remembers. They pooled enough money for a modest burial, with no clergy, no music, and none of Major's own songs played. Only a handful of people showed up, scattered around the grave as if unsure whether they were burying a legend or a stranger. There was no gravestone, only a small wooden plank with his name, smudged by a September rain. Inside the abandoned house where he once lived, they found a brown leather suitcase, thick with dust, tucked beneath a broken bed. Inside were 3 unreleased recordings, labeled in pencil, his voice thin, offbeat, coughing between verses but still trying to carry the final notes, as if refusing to go quiet. In that same suitcase was a handwritten letter on yellowed paper, dated 1981. On the outside, only a single initial M. No one knew who M was. Some guessed Marla, the daughter who once sent flowers without a name. Others said it stood for music, a farewell to the only thing he ever trusted. And some believed he never sent it at all, because even he didn't know if anyone was still listening. The first line read, "If one day I have no one left to sing for, I will still sing." The last line read, "As long as one person keeps my voice, I am not dead." But no one kept it. No label bought back his rights. No one reissued his songs. No one fought to reclaim justice for the years he was used, signed away, blocked from returning to the stage. Major Lance, the man who once made all of Chicago stop to hear a simple hook, died as if he never existed on the map of American music. His death was never rewritten, because no one wanted to rewrite it. Not because he wasn't worthy, but because forgetting is easier than facing a tragedy the industry helped create. No statues, no memorial concerts. His home was sealed after 3 months and listed as abandoned property. They repainted the walls, scrubbed away ink stains from the studio, dismantled the old sound system, and even took down the nameplate by the door. When Major Lance died, it wasn't just an unacknowledged death. It was the total collapse of a life with nothing left to lose. No bank accounts in his name, no insurance, no active credit cards, no home officially owned. The house he lived in had been mortgaged 3 times. The deed sat with a local bank awaiting foreclosure. All his music rights, including over 15 charted songs, had long been transferred, most through rushed contracts signed when he was no longer sober, or when his legal counsel worked for the label. His name still appeared on some reissued albums, but no royalties were paid. Major labels were never legally required to return the profits they had made from his voice. In an old file found at the Illinois Department of Revenue, Major owed over $27,000 in unpaid income taxes from 1965 to 1971, including penalties and interest, with no attachable assets. The case was closed with the note "Unrecoverable, subject location unknown." Later, Music lawyers called his case a perfect legal tragedy. No heirs with legal standing, no entity held accountable, and most importantly, no protected revenue stream tied to his musical legacy. The leather suitcase was the only personal item of value left. Alongside the 3 tapes and the handwritten letter, it contained a stack of old bills mostly for water, electricity, and 2 unpaid medical invoices, each over $300. Major Lance's death cost the music industry nothing, but it exposed everything they never gave him: justice, respect, and the right to keep what he created. No one knows where the annual licensing money from the Monkey Time went after his death. Only one thing is certain: none of it ever reached him, not even when he was alive. And when he died, what remained no longer belonged to him. Only those who once heard the Monkey Time on a rainy night might still remember that feeling, the sensation of being swept into something wild yet tender, from a man who didn't sing to be famous, but to survive. And only they, if they're still alive, might sometimes wonder how could a voice that once made a nation dance end up buried as if it never spoke a word. Years after Major Lance's death, some say that on rainy September nights, if you walk past the public cemetery in South Atlanta, you might hear humming between the nameless graves, a simple melody, a swaying rhythm, like someone trying to sing a bit of that never quite ends. No one can say for sure if it's real, but no one denies it either, because if a soul still has something left to say, maybe it's his. Major's echo isn't found in gold plaques, memorial stages, or biographies. But for those who first heard the Monkey Time on a crackling living room radio, or saw him dance in a faded silver suit across the Regal Theater stage, his name still lingers not as a star, but as an old friend who once made them feel less alone. In 2010, a young DJ in New York stumbled across an unreleased recording of his on a vintage resale site. He remixed the intro into a chill soul loop and posted it online. Within 3 days, it had over 100,000 plays. No one knew who the singer was. No copyright could be traced. But among the comments was one quiet line: "This is Major Lance's voice. He once made the whole city stop to hear him sing. And I used to be a kid who danced to him every Saturday afternoon." The commenter was Daryl, a former amateur dancer in Chicago, now over 70. He had performed to the Monkey Time in 1964 when he was just 16. He no longer remembers the lyrics, but he still remembers the way Major looked at the crowd, confused, hungry, as if just one more listen could help him keep going. The question no one answers isn't buried in label archives, lost contracts, or decayed tapes. It lives in the memory of everyone who once swayed to that beat. Do they still remember him? Did they ever ask where he went, or did they let him fall into the one place he feared most, a room with no music, no one beside him, and nothing left to sing? Major Lance is gone, but somewhere, in an unrewound tape, in a fading memory of someone who once swayed to "It's Monkey Time." If you don't want that voice to disappear again, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and share this video with someone who ever loved an old song, who ever believed music could hold someone here a little longer.